Imagine stepping out of your front door tomorrow morning. You walk down your driveway, coffee in hand, and you look around at your perfectly familiar neighborhood.
Right. Just the exact same routine you do every single day.
Exactly. You see the street lamps, the oak trees, the houses you pass all the time. The usual morning commute traffic is building up.
Hmm.
And then suddenly, with this jarring, almost dizzying shock of clarity, the perspective completely shifts.
Oh, yeah.
You realize that your entire neighborhood, your house, the street, the cars, everything, is actually just a tiny patch of moss resting on the shoulder of a massive ancient giant sleeping in the hills.
That is a crazy visual.
Right. But I've been thinking about this feeling, this radical shift in perspective.
Hmm.
If you suddenly realize the ground beneath your feet was alive and colossal, what does that actually do to a person's brain?
Well, it creates a state of profound cognitive dissonance, right? Followed by a massive rush of awe. When the mind is forced to take something it has entirely taken for granted and view it as completely alien, it shakes us out of our psychological autopilot.
We just stop seeing things functionally.
Exactly. We stop seeing them just as objects to be used and start seeing them existentially, like as marvels that actually exist.
And that feeling, that sudden staggering shift where the completely familiar instantly becomes gigantic and alien, that is exactly what we're chasing today. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are opening up a huge stack of sources, notes, and historical analyses surrounding a masterpiece from 1925, G.K. Chesterton's book, The Everlasting Man.
It's such a foundational text.
It really is. Now, the context here is critical. The sources indicate this wasn't just written in a vacuum. It was a direct response to H.G. Wells and his incredibly popular book, The Outline of History.
Yeah, Wells was really capturing the zeitgeist of the early 20th century. He presented human civilization as this seamless, purely material, gradual evolutionary progression.
Like an escalator just going straight up.
Right, exactly. In his view, humanity was just the next logical step up from the animal kingdom. And Jesus Christ was framed as, well, just one more charismatic human teacher among many.
Slotting neatly into a long line of ancient gurus.
Precisely. And Chesterton looked at that flattening of history, that sort of reduction of the miraculous into the mundane, and essentially argued that Wells was missing the two most astonishing, disruptive realities in the history of the universe.
Which are?
The absolute uniqueness of the human being and the absolute uniqueness of Christ.
But here's the thing for you, the listener. Our mission for this deep dive isn't just to recap a literary debate between two British intellectuals from the 1920s.
No, that would be pretty dry.
Yeah. We are exploring a highly specific, highly personal question today. How does this dense, nearly century-old book actually inspire a modern Christian to love Christ more deeply and live for him more fully in their daily life today?
That's the real core of it.
Right. Because how do we get that giant shoulder perspective on something as familiar as, Sunday school?
Well, the bridge between a 1925 history debate and a modern spiritual awakening is the restoration of wonder.
Wonder.
Yeah. Chesterton's primary method throughout this text isn't merely to win an argument by stacking up historical facts. He does do that, but he wants to strengthen the intellect precisely so it can stir the heart.
So it's not just an academic exercise.
Not at all. And the mechanism he uses to do this is a deliberate, calculated use of distance. He operates on the premise that we are simply too close to the Christian story to see its actual shape.
So we are like the person living on the giant's shoulder. We can't see the giant because we are literally standing on it.
Exactly.
So how does he actually force us to step back?
He demands an imaginative exercise. He argues that if we cannot look at the church with the burning love of a devoted first-century insider, the next best thing is to look at it with the sheer, unadulterated curiosity of a total outsider.
Okay, I like that.
He asks the reader to mentally strip away the stained glass, the cultural baggage, and the political arguments of the modern era. Instead, imagine viewing the 12 apostles as if they were ancient scholars from a completely different hemisphere.
Just totally alien to you.
Right. Or try looking at the Catholic Church as if it were a newly discovered, mysterious temple high in the remote mountains of Asia.
The goal is to observe it without that bored, irritated complacency as someone who, grew up vaguely around it but never truly grasped its magnitude.
Spot on.
The sources outline a specific analogy he uses for this, involving a man riding a horse. And I think this is fascinating. If you just view a man on a horse as a boring, everyday commute, or like a dusty picture in a family photo album, you are entirely blinded to the reality of the thing.
You've lost the magic of it.
Completely. But I want to pause and challenge the mechanics of this for a second. The text suggests we should pretend the horse is a prehistoric monster.
Right, a bizarre creature with a tiny head on a massive neck, walking on feet made of solid horn.
Yeah. I mean, I am struggling to see how playing make-believe, like pretending a horse is a monster, actually helps us find historical truth. Doesn't that just turn history into a fairy tale?
I get why you'd ask that. It sounds counterintuitive, but it is actually a profound psychological tool for uncovering truth.
How so?
Well, the human mind is incredibly efficient at filtering out the familiar. We look at a horse and think, oh, that is an outdated, primitive substitute for an automobile.
We just reduce it.
We reduce a living, breathing marvel to a utility. By forcing yourself to view the horse as a strange, improbable creature, you strip away that utilitarian blindness. You see its actual objective shape for the first time.
Oh, I see. You realize that a horse is actually an astonishing, unlikely piece of biology.
Exactly. It is about removing the dust of familiarity to see the objective reality. And Chesterton takes this exact same alien perspective and applies it directly to humanity itself.
So, applying the monster horse lens to the person in the mirror.
Precisely. When we step back from our ingrained textbook assumptions about biological ladders and seamless evolution, and we look at a human being objectively, we realize that man does not fit smoothly into the natural order.
We stand out.
Man is a freak. He is a profound stranger on the earth.
That's a strong way to put it.
It is, but if you observe the animal kingdom, you see creatures perfectly adapted to their environments. A polar bear has thick fur, a fish has gills, but humanity.
We don't fit.
We cannot even sleep comfortably in our own natural skin. We have to wrap ourselves in artificial bandages called clothing. We have to construct artificial environments called houses.
We prop ourselves up on artificial crutches called furniture.
Yes. We are the only creatures shaken with the bizarre physical convulsion of laughter, as if we are privy to some cosmic joke that the rest of the universe entirely missed.
That is so true.
And we are the only creatures burdened by a mysterious sense of shame, feeling the need to hide our basic bodily functions. From an objective, purely observational standpoint, a human being is not just a clever ape.
What are we then?
A human being is a biological revolution.
A biological revolution.
Yeah.
And the sources point to what Chesterton calls the myth of the caveman as the glaring proof of this revolution.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
Because we all grew up seeing those textbook illustrations, right? The chimpanzees slowly standing up straighter and straighter until he becomes a modern man carrying a spear. We have this entrenched image of early man as just a mindless brute.
Grunting and hitting things with clubs.
Yeah. But the actual archaeological evidence completely shatters that gradual timeline.
It really does. The discovery of prehistoric cave paintings, places like Lascaux or Altamira, they entirely disrupted the neat gradualist narrative.
Because when historians and scientists actually went into those caves, they didn't find the scratchings of a mindless brute slowly trying to figure out how his hands worked.
No, they found sweeping, magnificent art. They found perfectly proportioned drawings of reindeer, mammoths, and hunters.
And it was executed with incredible skill, right?
Unbelievable skill. They used pigments mixed with a clear understanding of chemistry and permanence.
The text has a fantastic line about this. It says, "Art is the signature of man." I really want to unpack the implications of that for a second. We can easily imagine an animal evolving a physical trait to survive, like an elephant growing a longer trunk to reach leaves.
Sure, or a bird developing a different beak to crack seeds.
Right, that makes logical, dialogical sense. But the jump to art is fundamentally different.
It is an absolute staggering chasm.
Why is it so different, though?
Because survival requires finding food, shelter, and reproducing. Drawing a picture of a mammoth on a cave wall does absolutely nothing to fill your stomach or protect you from the cold.
It's useless for survival.
Exactly. It is a purely gratuitous creative act.
Yeah.
You cannot extrapolate a monkey carving statues or painting murals no matter how much time you give it.
It's just not in their nature.
Right. The ability to conceive of something in the mind and then manifest it into physical reality purely for the sake of beauty or representation, that is an absolute break from the rest of the animal kingdom.
Let's pause right here and bring this down to the ground for the listener. I hear terms like the imago Dei, the image of God thrown around in theology classes and sermons all the time.
It's a very common phrase.
But for someone driving to work right now or folding laundry or answering emails, what does this sudden biological revolution practically mean for their Tuesday morning?
It shifts the entire foundation of how you view your own existence. and the existence of everyone around you.
How so?
If the secular materialist narrative is entirely true, then you are nothing more than a highly complex cosmic accident. You're just a temporary collection of atoms merely reacting to stimuli.
Which is pretty bleak.
Very. It means your daily work, your loves, your frustrations are ultimately meaningless biological impulses. But if Chesterton is right, if humanity is a sudden, miraculous insertion of a sub-creator into the natural world, then every single human action carries divine weight.
Because the ability to create is a reflection of the grand designer.
Exactly. When you view humanity not as a clever animal, but as a sudden, miraculous biological revolution, it infuses the mundane with awe.
So it changes how we see our daily tasks.
Completely. It means that whether you are painting a canvas, building a complex financial spreadsheet, designing a garden, or telling a bedtime story to your children, you are exercising a divine spark.
You are doing something that nothing else in the known universe can do.
Right, and it fundamentally changes how you treat your coworkers, your spouse, and the stranger on the street. You begin to interact with them not as economic units or biological machines, but as immortal image bearers.
That is huge. Okay, so humans are this sudden, artistic, creative explosion on the Earth. What did we actually do with that creative spark before the first century?
Well, we got busy.
Yeah, the sources describe humanity building magnificent civilizations, sweeping mythologies, and incredibly deep philosophies. But it all leads to an era Chesterton calls the heathen adventure, which ultimately ends in tragedy.
Yeah, to understand the heathen adventure, we have to break another entrenched secular timeline.
Which one?
Modern history often portrays the ancient world as a steady, unbroken, upward climb from primitive barbarism to enlightened progress.
Right, that escalator idea again.
But that is simply not what the historical record shows. Ancient civilizations like Egypt, Babylon, and the early dynasties of China were incredibly complex, highly organized, and deeply sophisticated right from the dawn of recorded history.
They didn't start from zero.
No. And critically, instead of constantly progressing upward, human institutions and religions frequently decayed over time.
The sources outline how early paganism actually began with some very noble elements. It wasn't all just chaotic superstition, like we sometimes assume.
Not at all. Early paganism contained beautiful, poetic attempts to find the divine through storytelling and myth. People looked at the sun, the oceans, the harvest, and recognized a higher power.
And they tried to articulate that through mythology.
Exactly. And simultaneously, the philosophers of antiquity were making earnest, incredibly rigorous, rational attempts to find absolute truth through logic and reason.
So they were really trying.
They were. But the tragedy of the heathen adventure is that the human mind, operating purely on its own steam, couldn't hold it all together.
It fell apart.
The myths devolved into darker, more chaotic superstitions, and the philosophy splintered into competing, often cynical schools of thought.
And that splintering led to some deeply dark places. The sources spend a significant amount of time focusing on a massive historical conflict, the War of the Gods and Demons.
A very dramatic title, but an accurate one.
Specifically, this is the clash between Rome and Carthage during the Punic Wars. We always hear about Rome in history class, but Carthage. Why does Chesterton zero in on this specific conflict as the pivot point of ancient history?
Because Chesterton viewed the Punic Wars not merely as a territorial dispute over Mediterranean trade routes, he saw it as a profound spiritual war for the soul of the ancient world.
Wow.
You have to understand what Carthage was. Carthage was a fabulously wealthy, advanced, highly commercial civilization situated in North Africa. They had the greatest navy in the world.
But there was a dark side.
A deeply dark side. At the center of their highly sophisticated, wealthy society was a profoundly unnatural evil. The systematic sacrifice of children to their gods.
Specifically, deities associated with Moloch or Baal. I need to ask about the why here.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to just label them as cartoon villains, right?
Yeah.
But these were intelligent, successful people.
Very successful.
Why does a wealthy, advanced civilization systematically sacrifice its own children? What did they believe they were achieving?
It stems from a deeply transactional, anxiety-driven view of the universe.
Transactional.
Yes. In the Carthaginian mindset, the gods of nature and commerce were cruel, and they demanded the most precious thing a person possessed in exchange for prosperity.
So if you wanted military victory or a bountiful harvest,
you had to pay the ultimate price. It is the ultimate manifestation of materialism mingling with spiritual terror. They believed they could buy off the divine with the blood of their offspring.
that is chilling.
Chesterton frames this as a society that had embraced outright demon worship.
And on the other side of the sea, you have Rome. Now, Rome wasn't exactly a society of saints.
Oh, definitely not.
They had gladiatorial combat, slavery, and brutal warfare. How does Chesterton justify framing Rome as the quote-unquote good guys in this scenario?
Chesterton is careful not to canonize Rome. He openly acknowledges their brutality, but he draws a sharp distinction between what he calls healthy or natural paganism and demonic paganism.
Okay, what's the difference?
Rome represented a flawed but fundamentally human approach to the world. Roman religion was largely built around household gods, honoring ancestors, civic duty, agriculture.
Stuff that builds society.
Right. There was a strong emphasis on family structure and loyalty, what they called pietas. They were harsh, yes, but their fundamental values were aligned with the natural human order.
And Carthage wasn't.
Carthage represented an inversion of that natural order.
So Rome's victory over Carthage, when Scipio Africanus finally defeated Hannibal and the Roman legions dismantled the Carthaginian Empire, that wasn't just about who controlled the olive oil trade.
Not at all. From Chesterton's perspective, it was a providential preservation of the world.
A providential preservation.
Think about the physical and legal infrastructure Rome went on to build. The vast network of Roman roads stretching from Britannia to Syria. The establishment of the Pax Romana.
The Roman peace.
A common legal system, a common language in Greek and Latin. Rome's victory ensured that the Mediterranean world would be governed by a civilization that valued order and natural law.
It laid the groundwork.
It essentially laid down the physical and cultural vascular system that the gospel would later use to pump its message to the ends of the earth.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
If Carthage had won, the known world would have been shaped by a civilization built on the demonic cruelty of child sacrifice.
That cast the entire Roman Empire in a completely different light. But even with Rome's victory, even with the best infrastructure, the best laws, and the sharpest minds like the Stoic philosophers, it wasn't enough to save them.
No, it wasn't.
The sources describe the era right before the birth of Christ as a state of pagan despair. And I am really struggling with a specific phrase Chesterton uses here.
Which one?
He says the pessimism of the late Roman Empire wasn't because people were tired of evil, but because they were weary of joy.
Yes.
I can understand a civilization getting tired of war or famine or political corruption, but how does an entire civilization get tired of being happy? What did that actually look like on the ground?
It is one of the most piercing psychological diagnoses in the entire book. Think of it like a cultural hedonic treadmill.
Okay.
The Roman world had reached the absolute apex of human achievement. They had conquered the known world, accumulated unimaginable wealth, imported every exotic luxury.
They explored every sensual pleasure.
And debated every philosophy. But when you have everything and you still feel an agonizing void inside, despair sets in.
Because there's nothing left to try.
Exactly. Being weary of joy means they had exhausted every natural source of happiness and found it fundamentally lacking. They were bored with their own decadence.
That is so profoundly sad.
It is. Despair doesn't always look like people weeping in the streets. Very often, the deepest despair looks like profound, cynical boredom.
They had reached the absolute limit of what humanity can do for itself.
Exactly. And the collapse of the ancient world's morale proves a fundamental biblical truth regarding the doctrine of the fall.
How so?
It demonstrates historically that human effort, no matter how politically organized, intellectually rigorous, or artistically brilliant, cannot overcome the internal corruption of the human heart.
We can't fix ourselves.
Right. Civilizations do not merely die from external barbarian invasions. They rot from internal decay when their spiritual center collapses.
And bringing this back to the listener today, this is incredibly relevant. When we look at our own modern, hyper-advanced culture, it is easy to see parallels.
Very easy.
We are surrounded by unprecedented wealth, infinite entertainment options right in our pockets, and technological marvels. Yet there is this pervasive cultural exhaustion.
And a deep cynicism.
A sophisticated despair that feels very much like being weary of joy. You know, having 500 streaming channels and just feeling empty.
The psychological parallel is striking. And Chesterton's analysis acts as an antidote to that modern exhaustion.
How does it cure it?
Recognizing the absolute depth of the fall, acknowledging that we truly historically cannot save ourselves through better politics, better technology, or more self-care, makes the Christian appreciate the absolute desperate necessity of the cross.
It challenges the listener to reject the cynicism of the age. It calls you to embrace the joy of the Lord as an act of rebellion against a bored culture.
That's a great way to put it, an act of rebellion.
It means finding profound meaning in the simplest things, the daily duties of family, integrity in your workplace, faithful neighborly witness. You aren't just passing time. You're actively resisting the spiritual exhaustion of the world.
As Chesterton famously notes, a dead thing can go with the stream, but only a living thing can go against it. The ancient world was floating dead in the water. Humanity had dug itself into a psychological and spiritual cavern. And so, we arrive at the turning point of history.
We started this deep dive with the literal man in the cave drawing pictures of reindeer.
Right.
Now the world has exhausted itself, and we arrive at the second cavern. We arrive at that God in the cave.
The shock of Bethlehem.
So humanity is driven underground. And where does the story pivot? It pivots in a literal hole in the ground. If we use that tool of distance again, like if we try to look at the nativity story as if we've never ever heard it before.
Stripping away all the Christmas carols and the department store decorations.
Yes, the narrative is completely outrageous.
It is the ultimate paradox. The sovereign creator of the universe, the uncreated, eternal God who spoke galaxies into existence, enters human history.
But he doesn't arrive in Rome?
No, he doesn't arrive with legions of angels obliterating the Roman Senate. He arrives as a displaced, vulnerable, homeless infant in an agricultural outbuilding.
There's a line from the text that is just breathtaking. The hands that had made the sun and stars were too small to reach the huge heads of the cattle.
It gives me chills. We have grown far too close to Christmas. We have sanitized it with tinsel and warm, cozy feelings.
We made it safe.
But if you step back and observe the historical reality, it isn't a cozy winter festival at all. It is a revolution. God was born in a cave under the floor of the world, hiding from a tyrannical client king.
Herod.
Yes, Herod, who was actively slaughtering children to find him. It does not have the atmosphere of a royal birth. It has the tense, dangerous atmosphere of an outpost.
It's a divine infiltration behind enemy lines.
Exactly.
And the sources point out that the adult Jesus is just as shocking, just as alien as the infant Jesus. Chesterton talks about the riddles of the gospel.
This is crucial for understanding his impact.
Because the modern secular view, much like H.G. Wells, often tries to carve out a historical Jesus who is just this gentle, mild-mannered moralist.
They want a Jesus who essentially offers helpful life coaching.
Right, while stripping away all the miracles, the exorcisms, and the massive claims of divinity.
But Chesterton meticulously points out that this simple human Jesus is an entirely artificial construct. It is a modern invention projected backward.
It's just not in the text.
No. If you actually sit down and read the New Testament like it is a fresh newspaper report printed this morning, you do not find a stream of comfortable, harmless platitudes.
What do you find?
You find stunning rebukes, impossible ethical demands, and claims to absolute cosmic authority.
He tells crowds to rejoice when they are persecuted and tortured. He tells them not to worry about their physical survival tomorrow because God feeds the birds.
And then he turns around to religious leaders and says, "Before Abraham was, I am," claiming the very divine name of God.
Consider the psychological profile of a man who says those things.
Right. If a mere human teacher tells you that you must love him more than your own parents, or that he has the authority to forgive sins committed against other people,
He's not a great moral teacher.
he is either entirely unhinged or he is exactly who he claims to be.
The sources mention something specific here about how Jesus' teachings didn't fit his environment at all, contrasting him with other historical religious figures. Can you unpack that?
Sure.
Because the common secular argument is always that Jesus was simply a product of first-century Judea, just shaped by the cultural forces around him.
That is a crucial distinction Chesterton makes. Let's look at the contrast. Take Muhammad, for example, the founder of Islam.
Okay.
The Quran allows for a man to have up to 4 wives. Now, setting aside theological debates, from a purely sociological standpoint, that allowance made absolute logistical and cultural sense in 6th century Arabia.
It fit the environment.
It fit the environment of a tribal, patriarchal society engaged in frequent warfare. A historical figure produced by his environment will teach what the environment expects or can easily accommodate.
But Christ's teachings did the exact opposite.
Precisely. Look at Christ's sacramental view of marriage, the radical assertion that a man and a woman become one flesh permanently, and that what God has joined, man cannot separate.
It was not a popular opinion.
It made absolutely zero sense to the culture around him. It directly contradicted first-century Roman law, which allowed for incredibly easy, practically no-fault divorce.
And a clash with Jewish law, too, right?
Yes, which also had established provisions for divorce. Jesus wasn't adapting to his market. He was dropping an ideal from entirely outside of time into the middle of human history.
And there was this striking analogy in the sources about a statue of the Virgin and Child. In modern times, people sometimes want to focus entirely on the abstract, ethical teachings of Jesus.
The Sermon on the Mount, the Golden Rule.
Exactly, and ignore the messy physical reality of the Incarnation. How does Chesterton address that?
He argues that you cannot just sever the theology from the history. He uses the image of the statue to show that you cannot take a chisel, chip away the mother, and leave the baby suspended in midair.
You can't separate them.
To approach the divine, you have to approach the human historical reality of how he arrived. God didn't just shout moral instructions from the clouds. He took on a biological mother. He took on flesh, hunger, fatigue, and vulnerability.
And think about how that reshapes the listener's devotion. Meditating on the God in the cave completely shatters any spiritual complacency.
It forces humility.
It humbles our worldly ambitions. It reminds us that God intimately entered our poverty so that we could find a home in Him. It changes the Christian life from anxious rule-keeping into a breathless, profound gratitude.
Which perfectly sets up the actual nature of his mission on earth, because Christ didn't just enter the world to be a static symbol of humility in a cave.
He had a plan.
He arrived on a highly specific, lightning-fast mission that looks absolutely nothing like the lives of other religious founders. Chesterton calls this the strangest story in the world.
Let's draw that contrast out. If you look at the other great sages of antiquity, figures like Socrates or Buddha, how does the trajectory of Christ's life differ from theirs?
The differences are foundational. Look at Socrates, the ultimate philosopher. His life is essentially a long, wandering conversation through the streets of Athens.
Just talking to people.
Right. Engaging in fascinating, endless dialogues about the nature of truth, justice, and virtue. And when he is ultimately condemned to die by drinking hemlock, he remains perfectly calm.
He views his own death almost as an annoying interruption to a good conversation.
He isn't actively seeking death. He is seeking truth, and death just happens to trip him up along the way.
His life is like a never-ending philosophical picnic. And look at Buddha.
Buddha's life is defined by a massive, overarching gesture of renunciation. He looks at the world, realizes it is overflowing with suffering, and concludes that suffering is caused by human desire.
So he tries to find a way out.
So he sits under the Bodhi tree and discovers a path of enlightenment to teach others how to escape the drama of desire. His ultimate goal is to transcend the drama of the world, to pass into nirvana, into peace.
But Christ's life is entirely different. It is not a wandering conversation.
Yeah.
And it is not an escape from the drama of the world.
Christ's life is a drama. It is a relentless, driving quest. From the very beginning of his ministry, the Gospels tell us his face is set toward Jerusalem.
He's on a march.
He moves with the speed, tension, and direction of a military march aimed directly at a single, terrifying objective: his own brutal execution.
The agony in the Garden of Gethsemane is the exact opposite of Socrates' calm acceptance or Buddha's detachment.
Christ feels the full weight of the horror, yet marches directly into it. He did not come primarily to teach a new philosophy. He came to die.
So, if other ancient philosophies are like a peaceful retreat or a symposium, the gospel is fundamentally a rescue mission behind enemy lines.
The primary objective is the cross.
This highlights a massive distinction in Christianity. We don't just follow the teachings of Jesus as a moral philosophy. We worship a person. The gospel isn't a system of thought. It is, first and foremost, a thing that actually happened in history.
That historical intervention is the crux of the whole matter, both literally and figuratively. Chesterton explains how the cross breaks what he calls the Asiatic wheel of endless cyclic thought.
The wheel.
Yeah, ancient pagan philosophies and Eastern religions often viewed history as an endless cycle of repeating patterns, a wheel of reincarnation, or the eternal recurrence of seasons and empires rising and falling.
It is a closed loop of despair.
But the cross is a definitive intervention.
It is a sword thrust into the wheel.
Exactly. It breaks the cycle. God sacrificed himself in a specific place at a specific time to permanently alter the trajectory of the human soul. It is a singular, unrepeatable event that shatters the endless loop of human futility.
And let's think about the practical application of this for the listener's daily faith. The Christian faith isn't built on abstract vibes or a vague feeling of spiritual connectivity.
No, it's grounded in reality.
It is built on historical facts. It is built on an empty tomb. Seeing Christ not just as a gentle teacher, but as the captain who carries his 5 wounds in the front of battle, completely transforms how a person loves him.
It changes everything.
It takes faith out of the realm of polite religious duty and turns it into passionate, fierce loyalty. You aren't just agreeing with a set of ethical guidelines. You are following a victorious king who led a successful rescue mission.
And because the founder's story ended in an impossible, historically disruptive resurrection, the institution he left behind adopted the exact same impossible habit of continually rising from the dead.
Yes, the immortal church. Now, if the secular historians like H.G. Wells were right, the early church should have just been a vague, simple group of peasants that gradually got complicated, layered with bureaucracy, and corrupted over the centuries.
But the sources point out the witness of the heretics, which tells a completely different story.
The historical record shows that the early church was not a vague blob of general spirituality. From day one, it maintained a fiercely balanced, highly specific orthodoxy, while being violently attacked from all sides by wildly contradictory heresies.
The church was constantly navigating a razor-thin path between extremes.
Wait, the sources throw out terms like Gnostics and Manichaeans in this context. I've heard those words in history documentaries, but what did that actually mean for an everyday person living in the 2nd or 3rd century? Why were these ideas so dangerous?
Gnosticism and Manichaeanism were powerful movements that essentially taught that the physical material world was inherently evil, created by a lesser, flawed deity.
And the spiritual realm was pure.
Right. For an everyday person, this meant your physical body, marriage, eating, agriculture, all of it was viewed with suspicion or disgust. It was a religion of profound escapism.
We wanted to disconnect from the dirt of the earth.
Yes, a purely spiritual, ascetic religion. On the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you had pagan influences pushing for total worldly indulgence and hedonism, worshiping nature and the body itself.
So the church had to thread the needle.
Exactly. The church had to fight tooth and nail to maintain the balance, declaring that the physical world is fundamentally good because God created it and dignified it by becoming flesh in it, but simultaneously acknowledging that the world is fallen and in need of spiritual redemption.
And these theological battles weren't just academic hair-splitting. Let's look at Athanasius.
A giant of the early church.
He was a bishop in the 4th century who famously stood contra mundum against the world to defend the doctrine of the Trinity against the Arian heresy.
It was a massive conflict.
Honestly, to a modern ear, debating whether Jesus is of the same substance or of a similar substance as the Father sounds like the ultimate dry, bureaucratic, theological red tape. Why did Athanasius fight so hard for this? Why did it matter so much?
Because Athanasius recognized that if Arianism won, the core beauty of Christianity would be destroyed.
How so?
Arianism basically argued that Jesus was a created being, the highest and first creation, but not fully equal to God the Father, not eternally God. It made God easier to understand, more rational to the Greek mind.
But think about the implications of that. If God is just a solitary, single entity floating in eternity before he created the universe, who is he loving?
Love requires an object. Love requires a relationship.
Precisely. The doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit means that love, communication, and relationship existed within the very nature of God before a single star was formed or an angel was created.
God is love because God is inherently relational.
Athanasius wasn't fighting over a bureaucratic technicality. He was fighting to keep God as a holy family, rather than reducing him to a cold, isolated cosmic dictator who needed to create a universe just to have something to love.
That completely flips the script on how we view church dogma. It isn't a cage designed to trap free thought. It's a fortress built to protect a beautiful, life-giving truth.
And that fortress has been besieged over and over again. Chesterton talks about the 5 deaths of the faith. He argues that Christianity has died at least 5 times in history.
He identifies specific eras where the church faced seemingly insurmountable threats.
Like what?
It faced the Arian heresy in its early days, the massive rise and military expansion of Islam, the deep moral corruption of the Renaissance papacy,
The skepticism and rationalism of the Enlightenment.
and the materialist Darwinian worldview of the Victorian era. In every single one of those eras, the cultural elites, the philosophers, and the critics confidently announced that Christianity was finally finished. It was obsolete. It was dead.
There is a quote from the text that I absolutely love, and I want you to unpack it for us. Chesterton writes, at least 5 times. The faith has, to all appearances, gone to the dogs. In each of these 5 cases, it was the dog that died.
It's brilliant.
What does that mean for our understanding of history?
It highlights the supernatural resilience of the church. If you view history simply as a sociological process, it makes zero statistical or historical sense that this one highly specific institution has survived.
Survived the fall of the Roman Empire, the chaos of the Dark Ages, the guillotine of the French Revolution.
And the pervasive cynicism of modern secularism, all while maintaining its core ancient creed. Every culture that predicted the church's demise eventually collapsed, and the church experienced a massive, unpredictable resurgence.
It survived, as Chesterton says, because it had a God who knew the way out of the grave.
How does this historical armor impact a modern person sitting in a pew today?
Imagine you are a Christian today, and you are constantly scrolling through headlines, listening to pundits, or watching documentaries that confidently declare the church is dying.
That secularism has permanently won.
That your faith is just a fading relic of a less educated past. It is incredibly easy to feel cultural despair pressing in from all sides.
And that is exactly where the perspective of the everlasting man acts as an absolute antidote to panic.
Because you've seen this movie before.
When you realize that the church has been declared dead by empires far more powerful and intellectuals far more formidable than our current cultural critics, it completely removes the fear.
You realize you don't need to desperately reinvent the gospel to make it culturally relevant for the 21st century.
The culture will eventually pass away, just like Rome passed away, and the gospel will still be standing. It steels the Christian to swim against the cultural currents with confidence.
It fosters a resilient, joyful boldness.
Okay.
You aren't operating out of a defensive crouch because you know the final outcome.
It proves that the profound riddles of God are infinitely more satisfying and enduring than the temporary shifting solutions of man.
Which brings us to the actual tangible legacy of this book. If this book completely dismantled the secular narrative in 1925, who was actually reading it? Did it change anyone's mind, or was Chesterton just preaching to the choir?
Oh, it changed minds.
Because the ripple effect of this specific text is staggering. It created what historians sometimes call the Lewis pipeline.
It is genuinely difficult to overstate the influence this book had on the 20th century. In the mid-1920s, a young, brilliant Oxford academic named C.S. Lewis was a convinced, hardened atheist.
He believed the materialist narrative entirely.
But he read The Everlasting Man, and it struck him like a thunderbolt. He later wrote in his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, that for the first time in his life, he saw the whole Christian outline of history set out in a form that actually made logical, historical sense.
He famously credited Chesterton with baptizing his reason. That phrase is incredible.
It's perfect.
Lewis already had a vivid, romantic imagination, but his intellect told him Christianity was just an illogical, primitive fairy tale. Chesterton showed him that the gospel was the only key that actually fit the incredibly complex lock of human history.
Lewis called it the best popular apologetic I know, and from that single conversion, look what happens.
The pipeline opens up. Lewis goes on to write Mere Christianity, The Chronicles of Narnia, and the Screwtape Letters, directly influencing hundreds of millions of people globally.
But the impact of Chesterton's book wasn't limited to Lewis. It profoundly shaped the thinking of other literary giants like Dorothy L. Sayers, T.S. Eliot, and J.R.R. Tolkien.
It provided intellectual ammunition for Catholic leaders like Archbishop Fulton Sheen, and it continues to influence modern Christian thinkers like Os Guinness.
What is it about this specific book that allows it to bridge the gap between the intellect and the emotion so effectively?
It arms believers against modern reductionism. It refuses to let humanity be reduced to just atoms and biology, and it refuses to let history be reduced to meaningless chaos.
It proves, with dazzling wit and rigorous logic, that Christianity satisfies both the strict, demanding rigor of the human mind and the deepest, most desperate longings of the human heart.
It equips everyday Christians to engage with their skeptical friends, family members, or co-workers, not with anger, not with a defensive, embattled posture, but with the same witty, logical, joyful wonder that Chesterton modeled.
You are no longer defending a crumbling, outdated institution.
No, you are inviting people to see the greatest, most thrilling rescue mission ever undertaken, a story that just happens to be objectively true.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of historical and theological ground today. Let's do a final rapid-fire distillation of what we've discovered in these sources. Let's do it. First, perspective requires distance. We must step back and look at the Christian story with fresh, alien eyes to truly comprehend its magnitude.
Second, Man is not a gradual, predictable evolutionary step. He's a sudden biological revolution, an artist made in the image of a creator.
Third, human civilizations and the brightest philosophies of antiquity, despite their noble attempts, ultimately collapsed into exhaustion and weariness of joy because human effort alone cannot cure the internal disease of the fall.
Fourth, Christ is a historical earthquake. He is the God in the cave who entered history not to be a mild moral coach, but on a definitive marching mission to die and defeat death.
Fifth, the church is a resilient stranger in history. It survives every empire, outlives every heresy, and threads the needle of orthodoxy because it is animated by a God who knows the way out of the grave.
And finally, the gospel is the only key that fits the strange, complicated lock of humanity.
It fits perfectly.
Now, to you, the listener, we always want to leave you with something to chew on, something to challenge you as you step away and go about your week.
A final thought.
Chesterton shows us that the church has survived through the centuries by continually dying to the passing powers, the trends, and the fashions of the world. Think about your own life today.
It's a tough question.
If true faith requires us to swim against the stream of our own culture, what comfortable modern cultural assumption in your own mind needs to go to the dogs today so that your faith can experience a new resurrection tomorrow?
That is the ultimate question. The everlasting man invites us to strip away the exhausting assumptions of our modern age and encounter the thrilling reality of Christ anew.
Take that question with you into your week. Let these historical insights shape your daily routines, your work, and your family life. Approach your faith tomorrow morning with the wide-eyed wonder of an outsider looking at the truth for the very first time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.